For thousands of years, elders and knowledge keepers have used stories to educate future generations. Stories and words can help heal our hearts and make Mother Earth a better place for all people. This is Healing Hearts.
Hello everyone, welcome to Healing Hearts. I'm Tracy Koga. Well, they say that the land on which you live on can shape and influence the person that you are today. So tonight you're going to hear some extraordinary stories from people who have faced unsurmountable adversity, yet still today remain as resilient as ever. This is Healing Hearts, but first, a word from our sponsor.
So the Hive is a climbing and fitness facility, so we're bouldering only, which means no ropes or harnesses. We use mats for protection. The four pillars of our business are climbing, education, health and wellness, and community, and those aspects all kind of come together to create like a 5-star climbing experience.
Welcome back to Healing Hearts. A very special thank you to the Hive, our sponsor for Healing Hearts. Now let's open up our gallery to our panel. And yes, a lot of stories to be shared here tonight. I've got Michelle ready. I'm going to say and call you, Michelle, a human rights advocate. And that comes from the bottom of your heart and mine. Ruben Garang, I guess I want to say congratulations, the new Executive Director of Immigration Partnership Winnipeg and also a partner of this show. You too have an incredible story to share and give us insight on where we can go in the future. And definitely, last but not least, our knowledge keeper, and again, another very, very important partner in this show, Clayton Sandy. And we do have, hopefully, 2 more guests joining us, Colin James and Isla Busador, and they will share their stories too as well. So let's open it up. Ruben, I opened up the show saying that people, or I guess you, can be shaped by the land on which you live on, and also potentially influence who you are today. If you can kind of take your own personal story on your journey and how you came to where you are today and tie that all in, we'll start with you.
Thank you for having me for the second time. I'm Ruben Garang. I just wanted to also to correct that my title is not executive director, it's a director.
Oh,
position.
okay.
And it's a new position, so you call me Ruben now. Very fine with that. Thank you again for having me and have the opportunity to share my personal story. As you can see behind me in the picture is the based on from where I got it is the picture of the river called River Nile. It's one of the longest rivers in the world. And I happen to be born along that river in, one of the largest swampy area also in the world, where my village was or is located. It's now, which is very unfortunate, 2 years underwater because of the climate change. And, Nile is the longest river that runs through so many African countries. And so it's being dammed also by major players. And so there's a lot of flooding. And my village is one of the areas that's been affected. So most of the people that I know are now in the displaced camped on the top of the people that were displaced by the war. So anyway, in short, I left that area in 1987, the beginning of 1987, when I was, a teen. And I left it because of the war. And before I left the area, as you can see, is a savanna area full of all kind of wildlife gazelle, giraffes, bablos, and, you name it. And because it's closer to the river, the grasses during the rain could be very tall than, my height. I'm sitting down, seeing how tall I am, and full of life, you know. But that life was disrupted when the war started, and I have to leave my parent, my sibling, the younger one, the older one, my mother, and the place that I had my education, which I, which is not a education to go and sit in the class, but education about life, about my relationship with the surrounding, my relationship with my father, cattle, my relationship with the, extended family. I come from a clan system, and the place that I mentioned to you has been flooded, has been a place that we live in for generations. And the clans, and sub-clans multiplies, and it's a ranges of villages, say from, Winnipeg to Brandon. And if you go around in the villages, that's before, not now, but before, when I was a child, before the war, you know, you could be known by anybody as long as you mention who you are and mention your father names. They will, if they not related recently to you, they will know somebody from your sub clans, or maybe one of your aunts married to that family, or something. Somebody will know somebody from your family. So that make it look like it was a big family of people that you don't even know their names. But it was very comfortable that um, you always know that you are safe when you are in the area. So my interaction with the environment, my interaction with the people in the area shaped my life. But unfortunately, I have to leave my country. And when I was young, and I left, not because I chose to leave, but circumstances forced me to leave, and then I ended up becoming a soldier when I was very young, and live in the military life, guerrilla life, for a number of years before I deserted. But I think what kept me at that time was my earlier life before I left the village. And that's where I gain my strengths when things are not in order. There's always a spring in me of what the order means. When things are tapped, then there's also inside me a feelings of how calm the situation used to be. When there was no love, then I would also remember, the kind of love that I received when I was surrounded by my own family, my sibling, my younger, my mother, my aunt, before I left my country. When there's violence, then I would also know how elders and, community leaders deal with a situation to calm it down. And when there's a situation of justice, then I will also know that we're all human beings, we make mistakes, and people are always welcome back, and given chance to, to live their life collectively with people in the community. Those are some of the things that I learned. And so, cut my history short, I, you know, left my country to another country, and then went back to my country, and then I left my country again to another country, and then become a refugee, and for about 9 years before I actually moved to Canada. And so when I came here, at the age of 30 something, I have to, you know, start all over by going to high school, do upgrading, and then challenge myself to, go to the university. And ever since I'm here in Winnipeg, I only stayed in Calgary for 5 days before I moved to Winnipeg. So Winnipeg is my home, and enjoying staying here with people.
Oh, well, and we're so fortunate to have you. Ruben, if you could just go back into your story, why did you have to leave your village at such a young age? If you can kind of expand on that, just so people can understand.
So it's very difficult sometimes to point to one things, but I think like we are interrelated in one way or the other, and sometimes things that happened far away could also impact people from far away. So my country of origins is called the Sudan, and the Sudan is an African country, but it was colonized by the British. And before the British leave the Sudan, uh, they were based very much in Egypt, and Egypt is the northern country of the Sudan. And so they, had the influence of the Egyptian government. And so when they came to the Sudan to control the Sudan and formed what they think was the government, the first government of the Sudan, although Sudan is multi-ethnic, society with so many different ways of governance. They formed that government and with the influence of the Egyptians. So they ended up empowering, minorities, people from the Arab origins to control majority of the Africans. And so going back to the 1950s, the country has been in a war of identity, marginalizations, and there was issues of religion, and where people ways of life were seen as evil, and that they should not practice what they used to practice, and people need to be introduced to Islam, and yeah, those elements. And then also when um, there was also influence of the Christianity later on, and very vast region with all the resources. So there was a lot of players in the situation. And so in my part of the Sudan where I come from, our people resist the people from the Sudan who were like controlling the whole country. And so they went to war with them in 1955, and they have a window of peace in 1972, but then again in 1983, the war broke out again. And that's the war that forced me to leave my village. And so I left with as I grow now, I kind of know that it wasn't a story that was told by, so the local people who joined the rebels had interest in young people to be doctrinated and, taught their ideas so that they could possibly join them. But then also like the Sudan government had also bad intentions, like if they come and capture your village and you're a boy, your chances of survival were very limited, because they know that you will also resist. And I come from a village where the first group that rebelled, the first leader from the group that rebelled in the 1970s was from there. And then the guy who led the 1983 also was from my village. So my village was kind of seen as the rebellious kind of a place. So we did not have any liking from the government. So there's a lot of banning of the villages and forceful migrations and all those. And so I ended up walking from my country miles after mile, hundred of miles. I don't know how many of you have heard of, there was a group that was recently called in North America here, Lost Boys of Sudan. I was one of those young people that tracked from the Sudan to Ethiopia in thousands.
Yes.
And we have to be camped by ourselves, stay by ourselves. Some of the things that I didn't mention, that one of the other things that also influenced my leadership role, because we had to take care of each other as a young children, and then there was kids that were more younger than
Yes.
myself. So
And
I assumed the
yeah.
responsibility of leadership.
No, and that's such a poignant story, Ruben, and I think we're going to hear this common thread. Clayton, I'm going to go to you because I do see perhaps Colin has joined us. You can unmute yourself, Colin, and Clayton. Colin, do we have you on audio yet?
Hello.
Hello. Yes, yes, we've got you on Zoom and we've got your video. Hey, that's the biggest thing. I've done my job tonight, you know? And you know
It wasn't you, it was me. I couldn't figure it out. So.
Hey, it's a learning curve. Believe me. Do not feel ashamed. I've got whippersnappers here that think I am like cuckoo, but hey, hello. There's numbers there, there's links there. I don't know. Anyways, I'm so glad to have you here. And Colin, Clayton tells me that you're the cultural director at the Dakota Teepee out in Portage la Prairie. And I'm going to do dual tag team with you and Clayton, because I guess when Clayton and I talked about this first show, I wanted to know about life on the res. And Clayton corrected me because I said, I want to know about life on the reservation. And he was like, oh, don't say that word. And I'm like, oh, what? And I said, okay, so I want this show to be educational. Like, teach us, tell us. And that's why I have Ruben on and Michelle on too, just to represent that we're learning more about our Indigenous peoples and the travesties that have happened. But we also need to learn that it has happened to other cultures too as well. So I'm going to start with you, Colin, and sort of, what is life like on the res?
Life on the res, we're very controlled. We're very controlled by the government. When you can hear my grandkids in the background, probably. They're the reserve. One of my grandpas used to say, there's two places set aside that in this world that have reserves, and that's in Africa and that's in North America. And the reserve is a piece of land that's set aside for us to live in. And we have our heroes and our old leaders, and some of the things that they've said in the past have been like, if you ever get a chance to watch the show Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, in the end, Sitting Bull, one of our great chiefs, he talks about life on the res. He says, and he had the foresight to see it, that they're going to give us land, and it's going to be a piece of land for you and your wife and your children, and it's not going to sustain. It's probably just going to sustain you and your wife. It's not going to sustain your children. They're going to be cutting off the future generations, and that's how it goes. Because right now we have 2 acres of land at Dakota Teepee, and as a Dakota, we don't recognize the borders between Canada and the United States. And up here in Canada, this is our northern hunting grounds, like traditionally a long time ago. So when we had our battle with the US government, and then we came north, and this is our northern hunting grounds, but they put a border up which kind of shielded us from the wrath of the Americans, and they called us hostile. So that's we were, this was our land before, and now they call us refugees in Canada. So the Dakotas, they look at us as refugees. We weren't here before. But if you there's documentations, if you read Charles Eastman's books, that's one of our old an old doctor who's actually in that show too, Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. As a child, he talks about playing along the Assiniboine, and there's so many different stories and so much archaeological evidence that we were here. So it's not recognized, and it's Canada, and um, what they say, history is bent to the ones that are writing it, and even our universities up in Canada, they 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 say what they want to say, and it's something that's sad, because these are supposed to be our educational places, higher learning, but it's something that's not shown.
No. I want to ask you, Colin, why have you remained? And you seem to have prospered. You seem to have grown knowledge.
I I remained on the reserve. I left actually I went to university, and I moved to a northern community in Manitoba, and I took a job as a medic, and I worked for 10 years as a medic. But in my youth, being on the reserve and being with my uncles, my some of the elders, I'm one of the ones that they say sometimes it takes a community to raise a child. I'm one of the ones that actually was wasn't shy to go and ask. So I was the one that went and sat with the elders, and being quiet and stuff like that. And eventually, when it came time when I left the northern community to come back south, I lived on a Cree reserve, so that's a different tribe. We came down, and my family asked me to move back to the reserve. So and help to teach and to take a job as the cultural, and I'm also the drug and alcohol counselor, a lot of different things. So they see they've seen the value in me, something that I can help in any way I can.
Oh, that's so important. Clayton, I'm going to bring you in. You can comment more on Colin's story, but there's a couple of questions too. Actually, you pose them. Is cultural knowledge helping the community heal through ceremony? And maybe, you might even be able to address this, Clayton.
Okay, thank you, Colin, for that history there. That history reminds me of just, I guess, the same history that I grew up with in my lifetime. Just knowing that history of the Dakota and Dakota people, in war in the States, and eventually wiping out the 7th Cavalry and getting chased into Canada, so our people weren't destroyed. But I think that I never had an opportunity to live on the reserve. So I actually grew up off reserve, and in 1941 my father went to World War II, and because of that he lost his status. And I guess at that time the Canadian government had something called enfranchisement. So when Dad went to war, and so he became a non-Indian, and then that was in 1941. And then the 12 kids that came after, when Dad got back, we were all non-status, so we never had status. So we wound up growing up around army bases, and then so it wasn't until till the early 80s, when a woman from BC, she lost her status for marrying a non-native guy. So she actually took it to the Supreme Court, and then she won, and then they brought in Bill C-31 in Canada, and then so any person who lost their status through marriage or through enfranchisement or different ways were able to get it back. So I got mine back at that time, but I still never went back to the reserve. Because I lived all my life off reserve, and and then eventually moved into Winnipeg in 1974. But I found that at that time, because I struggled, I found that because my family struggled, because of the residential school system and the 60s scoop and that, I found that I was lost all the time. And of course, I was doing a lot of drinking and getting in trouble and that. And it wasn't until I guess I finally decided to turn myself around, and I was getting tired of all the other stuff I was doing. And then I realized that somebody said one time, I heard somebody say at a conference one time that alcohol was never part of our culture. So that I really took that to heart, and then I realized again that alcohol was introduced by Europeans to our people, and it destroyed so many of our people across Canada. And I always say sometimes there probably wasn't one Indigenous person in Canada in the last maybe 60 years that hasn't been affected by alcohol in some form. And you look at the aftermath. So I changed at that time. I quit drinking in 1983, and I haven't drank since. But at that time, I started to learn about my culture. I started dancing powwow, started attending ceremonies, and I think once I learned that, I realized that what I really have to offer, and what I have to offer is beautiful, and it's educational. So I started learning about my ceremonies and sun dances and sweat lodges, and I found it was so beautiful. And then I started teaching my family about that. But that's a piece that I think that our people are missing because of the some of the policies of the Indian Act that's taken so much away. So I think probably just in the probably early 90s, our people are just starting to get that back now. So
Mm-hmm. No, I think it's really coming out to the forefront. We're going to come back to Colin and Clayton and, of course, Ruben, but I want to go to Michelle, a very special person that I got to meet. And Michelle, you can share your story, and your family is still currently living through it all in South Africa. So again, it's a very special story that needs to be told. Michelle.
Thank you for having me again, Tracy, and giving me this platform. And hello to everybody on the forum, and interesting to hear all your stories. I am actually from South Africa. I am 6th generation South African of East Indian descent. So how I ended up in South Africa was my ancestors were taken in the early 1800s to South Africa to work as slaves, basically, because in the 1800s, when black slave trade was abolished, the British needed another source of human resources. So they were in India at the time, and the Indians, East Indians, were very passive. So they went to all the East Indies, the islands, and they took them to South Africa to work on the plantation. And what they actually did was all the housing that was built for the black slaves were then used for the East Indian slaves. And they were known as indentured laborers, which was probably a better term to use for bonded slaves, right? They just changed the description. And so my ancestors were taken to South Africa to work on plantations and colonialized. And I grew up in the apartheid system. So I grew up in oppression, and being a person of color, I wasn't allowed to do a lot of things. We had Group Areas Act, which you have the Indian Act here in Canada. And the blueprint for the apartheid system for South Africa came from Canada. So we shared that, and we shared the same generational trauma. And growing up, up until I was in my late 20s, when Nelson Mandela was released from prison, that's when I got my first democratic rights. I wasn't allowed to be seated on a bus. I wasn't allowed into movies. I wasn't allowed into restaurants. Education was very limited, and we had the same dysfunctions. People did drugs, people did alcohol, and we were controlled by the British. Where we went, where we worked. For the longest time, our education qualifications were not recognized. So we had to do menial work. And up until today, the after effects of an apartheid system is very much alive. I mean, you no longer have it as a law since 1995. And what's amazing is in 1996, the residential school system was closed. And in 1995, apartheid ended in South Africa. So there's the correlation is there in growing up in poverty, growing up feeling like you don't belong, growing up in a system that eroded your confidence constantly, made you feel different constantly. You couldn't ask questions because if you question the white government or well, you had two types of colonialization. You had the British and you had the Dutch. So the British, the Dutch made it the law, but it was the British that created the segregation. So living in South Africa, we had curfews. We couldn't go into white areas. We couldn't buy homes in white areas. We were not allowed into restaurants, but the only thing they allowed us to do was shop in white shops. So our money was good, but we were subhuman. We were treated without any dignity. My dad one day, and my dad was a person who was very humble, discussing what was going on in South Africa at the time was illegal. And if you were caught talking about the government, it was considered treason. You would be jailed or you would disappear. Nobody would know what happened to you. And in 1995, when Nelson Mandela became president, we also had the TRC because people wanted to know what happened to their loved ones. And unfortunately, when you still have a government in place, records were destroyed. The same thing that's happening here in Canada. There's no accountability for what's happening. There's a lot of excuses. And the devastation that it leaves is felt for generations and generations. The generational trauma, the stigma that's attached to you as a person of color, that sense of not belonging in your own country. It's mentally, it takes many generations to get rid of that strangulation that we don't belong. And coming into Canada, I immigrated in 2016. I immigrated because I married a Canadian. And when I got here, the first thing I did was I started volunteering at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. And it's probably the best thing I've ever done coming into Canada because it literally opened my eyes to the history of Canada, because Canada has this non-tainted image, which is so nicely whitewashed, and nobody wants to recognize what's going on. I'm constantly amazed that children in residential schools, their bodies are being discovered and nobody talks about it. It's very sad. So I can relate to the crimes that have happened in regard to people going missing and missing Indigenous women. It was the same growing up as a person of color. If you went missing, nobody cared. You couldn't question it. Your family was too poor to even further look into it. You couldn't hire anybody, so you would just leave it. You can't do anything. You can't question the people that govern you. Mm-hmm. And even when the TRC happened in South Africa, we still didn't get answers because everything was destroyed, evidence was destroyed. And up until today, I still have friends whose family has gone missing and nobody knows what happened to them. So the apartheid system wasn't easy to grow up in. I actually revisited a very dark past of mine when I came into Canada and I experienced racism firsthand. And having lived experiences, I thought that part of my life was way behind me in South Africa, only to realize it happens here in a very passive aggressive manner. And I spent the last 1 year when I met Tracy. Actually, there was a civil war happening in my city in June this year. And I was very devastated being far away from my family. And at the same time, I was struggling with mental fatigue, mental health issues brought on by racism, by white Canadians, asking me to go back to my country, picking on the color of my skin, making jokes about my country. At first, I shrugged it off and I thought, this is Canada. And when you're in Rome, you do as the Romans. You know, what should you do? Who should I go to? Why should I question it? I am an alien here, and I'll always be a perpetual foreigner in Canada. You know, the question is, where are you from? And I'm from South Africa. No, where are you actually from? Because you don't look Black, but you don't look white either. And these are questions that come up constantly. And even though I'm in the process of becoming a Canadian citizen, I still don't feel like I'm welcomed in Canada. And I'm constantly questioning that. And it's a very difficult place to not belong. And I can't imagine what that must feel like for the Indigenous people who are native to this country, to have the country taken away from you and then made to feel like you don't belong. That is even more compounded. And so yeah, the last year I've really done a 360-degree turn in questioning my worth, my value, and I ended up leaving the company that I worked for. I had a very good job, and it was too toxic for me. I took it up. I struggled with Canada Life, proving to them that racism affects your mental health. I fought that, and I won that with Canada Life. They couldn't understand why comments made to me will affect me mentally. And I had to explain to them that you have taken me back to a very dark place in my life that I have closed up. And I want to forget that that part of me existed, where I grew up in this place where I was constantly controlled by a white government. Although I'm married to a person who is white Canadian, up until now, I will correct biases because white Canadians don't understand it. I guess when you're growing up in that environment, you don't know it. And when you are growing up in a schooling system where your history is not real, and the irony in it is, as a future citizen, is I need to study the history of Canada and write a history test to become a citizen. And your history is not 100%. So which history am I going to learn? Am I going to learn the history of where you killed, where there was genocide in a so-called schooling system? Or am I going to learn the history of who actually discovered the Indians in North America?
Well, I know. Yeah, I'm going to just interrupt you there because that's a wonderful endpoint and a very great question then to ask Colin, Ruben, and Clayton. History. Do we rewrite it? How do we rectify this problem? And Michelle has brought it up. She wants to be a Canadian. So, Ruben, you've been quiet because you talked first. And now with your new position at IPW, I mean, welcoming immigrants and helping them assimilate, right? Or to a certain degree. You might have to unmute yourself.
It's not easy questions. I think it was today actually when I was, listening to the news, and there's that story where on the news where a teacher used N-word in the class, and got media attention. And the discussion is this word should not be used. We're not using that word anymore. But did people just change, maybe not to use the word, but the system has not changed? Those are the real questions that we should be asking ourselves. Because so one word that they said, there is a drive why the person reached that conclusion to use that word. There's a mindset. And because, we claim to be, good, sometimes we don't look deep in us as human beings and be able to change the mindset and change our society in a kind of a more effective and inclusive way. And so the challenges of us coming here, to settle and integrate, like I shared my story, there are reasons why people leave. Michelle has shared hers, and coming here was dream and hope. And even though one cannot compare where, like I say, for example, I left my country because of the war, you know, there's a peace of mind here. This is it's the reality. It's calm compared to the time when there was a war in my country. And like I mentioned earlier, I have seen when there was stability in my village and when there was war. And so the question is, how are we going to write the history? If, I think there should be more of forums like this, where we have to really initiate honest discussions, to speak to our minds and our hearts in a way to change ourselves and to change the system. You can imagine how difficult it is when you have a dream of coming to this country that you are told that look like a paradise, and then you come here and the realities of life kick in.
No.
And any other difficult thing that we encountered, the most painful one is when you are subjected to systemic racism.
Most definitely. And I
Yeah,
think too, yeah, Ruben, I think it's bias too. And we need to have these open discussions to recognize our biases and to educate. So I'm going to call in now. I mean, you've heard Michelle's story and you've heard Ruben's, like, about how do we retell our history and make it honest and real. Not only for the people, not only for us here, but for our future generations, right? To know the truth. So I'm calling, like, living on the res. Let's go with the positive aspects of it. And, things that we may not know.
The positive aspects of living on the res, we can go through all you have a list that would go from here to Portage. It's a couple of kilometers away, but you could have the negative about it and that, but the positive, one of the positives for me is family. I can go outside. My neighbor is my cousin. My next door neighbor is my nephew. I got my nephew across. I got everywhere I go, I have family there. And I like I said, I talked to my uncles and my aunties a long time ago, and they they said, well, I asked them about residential school, and they said one of the things that residential school made was they broke the connection between us and the community. When some of them left and they came back, some of the elders died, and they felt like they didn't have a place. They felt like they weren't they didn't have a home here anymore because of the way it was. And part of it is us treating each other like family, and we have a different mindset as Dakotas. We try to. It's not about how much you make and how the riches of everything. And that's what Canada is built on, is the greed of the colonizers. So, but it's what we can give and what we can, how we look after each other as a family. The most important thing in our teachings as Dakota is that to be a good Dakota is to be a good relative, and in that teaching, as you take it further spiritually, then all of a sudden you figure out you're related to everything on this planet. You know, everybody, everything. So it's just that connection, I guess, that would be this is home. And the history of it is that as a Dakota, this, as our Dakota here in Dakota Teepee, we weren't given land or anything like that. Our grandfathers, they had to work for it. And so in us was this instilled a good positive work, just to keep working and to keep looking after each other. That's what we had to do to survive. And the elders tell us that. So it's when they try to, being Dakota, we always have our stories, as Clayton said, about this wiping out the 7th Cavalry and stuff like that. We are very resilient and very very strong in our ways. So if one of, going back to the old sayings, is one of the old medicine men said, if God intended me to be white, I would have been born white, you know. If so I'm born a Dakota, and that's how I am. And Blehemiche is that I'll face the storm. I'll get through the storm. I'll get through whatever comes my way. And it's just our resilience to stay alive as a people. Wow. And it's dying, our ways. And but that's the strength that we have, just to keep it going.
No. Well, hopefully we can change it. Clayton, I have a question for you, and I know you had given me another question on the relationship with Indigenous and Northern affairs. Is that working, and has anything changed? Maybe that's a question for Colin to answer, but I think I want to ask you, and I'm curious, the Indian Act, should it be abolished? Should it be changed?
Yeah, well, just from what Michelle talked about, about the act and in her homeland and the act here, and it just kind of binds you. And basically, we have a saying that the Indian Act controls us from the time we're born until the time we die, and basically that's basically it. So, until that's removed, a lot of our people can't do a whole lot and grow, and when you combine all the reserve land in Canada, it only comes out to 0.2%. Like all the reserves in Canada come 0.2% of all the reserves combined in Canada. And then I still wonder how come the oil companies still want to go across our land? It just bothers me when I think about that, and they still want to take our land away from us, and we have nothing left. But it just really bothers me. Going back to the truth, and I've learned that I had an opportunity to present at all the Truth and Reconciliation conferences that went on, and I often wonder, why is it so difficult for non-native people to face the truth? Like, well, why is it so hard for us to get the truth across to them? Because I believe unless the truth is accepted, nothing will change. So I'm not too sure why, because we're talking like generations after all this stuff have happened, and they're not to blame, but they still won't accept the truth. So that kind of bothers me also too. And we've had a saying in the 90s that the word history is basically his story. It's not ours. It's basically a white guy's story. So that's how we look at history. It's his story. It's not our story. So we have to make it our story, and it's slowly happening, but it's slow. It's too slow for me. That we have to get out there, and we are getting a lot of good native authors, coming out, and we're getting into the school system, but it's like a snail's crawl to basically to make that happen for our next generation, like for my grandkids, and for that to start understanding that. So it's always the bad and the good all the time. So
And like even our conversation tonight, I'm sure all of us have learned from each other.
mhm,
Maybe having more conversations, especially with our youth that maybe not know so much, to hear these stories, that it's not only us, but it's everyone, and that we all need to work together because we're all suffering and enduring this, not, I shouldn't say exactly the same, but like
mhm,
experiences that we can share. And I think sharing is the most important word, right? And sharing can lead then to understanding, and understanding will then lead to accepting, and then accepting the truth,
mhm,
which is what you want. So I don't know the answer, but
mhm.
I think just through learning and learning more, like Colin, thank you for being so honest and showing us a different life about life on the res. And I know that there's plenty of more stories and there's plenty of more work to be done. But I mean, truly amazing. And I hope, Ruben, now, in your new position, this might be an impetus for you to see how many more people we can share their stories on a platform like this, and to educate. And to Michelle, thank you so much for just being honest, and shedding
Yes.
light on a country thousands of miles away from us, and letting us have a little glimpse of the chaos and the turmoil that is happening while we live in our nice cozy homes and consider what we're going to watch on Netflix or whatever. But these are real problems. Clayton, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to say something. And in August, I was approached by the in Immigration Partnership Winnipeg by no, I was approached by Aurora, and one of the staff there, she wanted to know if I could take a group of young people to a reserve just for an experience. So I arranged with Colin to take a group of about 30 immigrants to Dakota Teepee. And it kind of surprised me because when the school bus followed me out there that morning, we got there for 10 o'clock, and I wasn't too sure who was on the bus, but the bus was full. And when they started getting off the bus in Dakota Teepee, the immigrant people, you could tell they're coming from all different parts of the world, like the way they're dressed, eh? And then so yeah, I was quite excited as a matter of fact, and so it was nice to actually get them to come to our community. And then Colin arranged to raise a couple of teepees, and they helped put the teepees up. And then we had a feast, and then we had a sharing circle, a pipe ceremony. But I wouldn't mind to offer that again to anybody that wants to actually have that experience again, because I think that those kind of experiences. So maybe we'll do a show one time right in Dakota
Yes,
Teepee.
yes, yes. So,
Yeah,
Colin,
yeah,
now I want to arrange Healing Hearts at Dakota Teepee. We have all of your family and relatives.
yeah.
Ruben, you bring a whole busload
Mhm.
from Immigration Partnership Winnipeg. Michelle, you're going to be our official guest. And Clayton, I just want to see you dance.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, so I think those are the kind of things that the outreach that I really enjoyed. I really enjoyed that day, and it made me think of bigger things and how we can get. So we had youth, but I wouldn't mind to bring adults out. Yeah,
No.
adults and youth, and just a time to be around a fire and to be around culture and the smoke and stuff like that, and just basically share that. Yeah. So.
Awesome. Okay, Colin, it's on your list.
That sounds good. I definitely rectify.
And we each have to bring a dish, so we'll have a multicultural feast.
Sure.
Well, I want to thank all of you for tonight. It has been so enjoyable. Well, enjoyable in the fact being it's been educational, and hopefully it has opened up some of the minds for our viewers too as well. So thank you, Ruben, Colin, Clayton, and Michelle. God bless. Thank you very much. Stay safe and healthy, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.